Hey, what's up, and welcome to this episode of EST, the podcast for established church leaders by established church leaders. My name is Josh.
My name is Sam, and Josh, I have a question for you.
Tell me your question.
On the last episode, I told you that you needed to go listen to Local H. Did you listen to the album Pack Up the Cats like I told you to?
I have not yet listened to Pack Up the Cats. I did listen to the one song that you told me to, and I did recognize it. So
you asked what was their biggest hit. I would not recommend that song just because it's just,
what was the name of the song again?
Bound for the Floor, which was
Bound for the
their
Floor.
biggest.
I recognized
but
it.
It's just an okay song from them. The album Pack Up the Cats is a lot better.
The problem is, I think, just looking at it and listening to a little bit of it, I don't think they play it on 99.5 The Wolf here in Dallas, which is the station that I've listened to for such a long time. So,
I know that station. When I've been in Dallas, I've listened to it. That's country music, right?
Of course, yes. So they don't play it on The Wolf. They must play it on a different station, probably the Eagle.
That station's a big deal, right? I mean, if you get on The Wolf, like it's a thing, right?
Yeah, they do this whole thing that when they give away tickets or something, they're like, "Which station gave you the tickets?" And you're supposed to howl. 99.5 The Wolf. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's a big deal. All right, so let's do church teams.
Yeah. I want to thank Church Teams, our sponsor of today's episode. They've been our sponsor for a while. I know if you listen to the show, you've heard our spiel, but really, this is an incredible company. They provide the church with so much good stuff. Their entire church management software package, it just all works together. We tend to piecemeal church management software. They bring it all together under kind of one umbrella, and they do it just about better than anybody else. So you get just the highest quality stuff at a price that's affordable because the price is scaled to your church. Which is great for small churches, but it's good for large churches too, because as you grow, you can add on the features that you need. So go to est.church, give them a call, reach out to them. Please tell them, hey, Sam and Josh, they told me to come talk to you, and because that'll help us out. But Boyd and his team are top notch. We love him. He's coming back on the show here in a few episodes. So I love talking with Boyd about technology. So. est.church is where you can get the offer. Church Teams is the church management software provider. If you are thinking about changing or need more church management software solutions, they are the ones that you should start with.
Yeah. Hey, let me set this up. We're going to be talking about people that will leave your church. And the reason I want to set this up is because there's been situations, I've been in situations before, and I've heard of other people who are in situations in which a small group of lay leadership gets upset with the pastor because people have left the church. That's the quote. Well, there's all these people leaving the church. Even though, in my case, I asked them to list them out, and we came up with like 12 people. And the church had grown to like 1,300 people. So there were several hundred more people who were now part of the church. But yeah, there were 13, 14, 15 people who had left the church. And the reality is this, and I think everybody just needs to kind of grasp this from the beginning, and it's a hard thing to think about, is some people are going to leave the church. It's just unreasonable to expect that as life goes by, no one will ever leave this church. The hard thing is, and I acknowledge this, the hard thing is that sometimes those folks that leave, they're going to be your friends. And it may feel like it's just a lot of people are leaving, and it's really just your bubble. Your bubble left, and they left you behind. But that's not necessarily the leadership's fault in that. And it's actually pretty damaging and evil to act like, or to set this expectation on leadership that they're going to have to retain 100% of everyone who ever comes to the church. Or they're going to, I actually heard about a guy this a couple weeks ago. And his elders set him down, and they had a list of everyone who had left the church in the 8 years that he had been the pastor of that church. And it wasn't that much.
Those are really bad elders, by the way. What
Horrible.
a horrible thing to do.
Horrible thing to do.
If you're an elder in a church and you're listening to this, that's like top tier jerk level. Good gracious. I know I'm interrupting you. Sorry, that just makes me mad. Like, they're supposed to be elders, and that's what they're doing.
Well, it
What a,
takes a
what
number
a
of things.
cranky bunch of crotchety old men.
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons why it's evil. One is you can't put all that on one person. People leave churches all the time and blame the pastor, even when it's not the pastor. And years down the road, they'll tell you, "Oh, I was going through something or something like this." There's been a number of times where somebody will leave the church because maybe they're about to get a divorce or something like that. They don't tell that to the people that they're complaining to. And they had a meeting with the pastor, and the pastor took the spouse's side. And so they're all upset. Now they won't go back to church. The pastor's put in a position where they can't say their theory on why the person left, but the people are out there. So there's just so many reasons why making this account of all of these people and then trying to load it back up on one person is a really bad idea. So we're going to talk about groups of people that leave, just to help everybody kind of get their head around the idea that, like, yeah, folks leave.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many. I've been in that situation, not with the elders. I mean, you would expect much more of elders, but I can't tell you how many conversations I've had at multiple churches that I've served in with the whole, well, people are leaving. Well, who? And it's like, well, this one family and this other family. And then I'm like, well, that's because that family's husband slept with that family's wife. And, you can't say that, right?
You can't say it. Yeah.
People are leaving. And it's like, well, I know why they're leaving. I did the counseling sessions. And it really does put you in an impossible place because, like, they make you the bad guy, even though you know the real story. Sometimes you don't know the real story. It's like, well, they just left. I don't know. They didn't talk to me. I can't tell how many times I've people just moved on. Sometimes they had a good reason. Sometimes they're not leaving mad. They're just moving on. I don't necessarily like that. I think for most people that's probably not healthy. Maybe for some it is, but
Right.
people do just
They
leave.
just leave.
And yeah, and we had a huge group that West Bradenton had several pockets. So we had become the repository of, we're just coming. When I got to the church, we had become a repository of people who had left other churches. So we had some Nazarenes there. We had some people from another Baptist church there. And, when the Nazarene church kind of got its act together, they went back to the church. We had a group that had split off from another Baptist church. Guess what? They split off from us. And so this whole people are leaving thing, it's like, well, they kind of weren't ever going to stay in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, I get why. It's like, wow, there's 20 less people here in our service. Okay, yeah, understandably. Like, that, I get it. But the pastor's not to blame for that. They came before I got here, and then they left shortly afterwards, before they even hardly knew me.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind here, which is a factor that we understand because we're so relationally driven and we work with relationships, is that people, it's like picture a sweater with the string that's loose on a sweater, and you pull on that string and you're going to pull a giant chunk of that sweater out. You know what I mean? Or any sort of, the illustration I'm trying to give here. It's the same thing. I've seen groups like, well, these 5 couples left, right? Well, in reality, just the one left and pulled the other 4 with them because they've been long-term friends and stuff like that. No, those other 4 aren't mad at me or mad at the worship minister. They're not mad at our denomination. It's that one that didn't get his way and then pulled the other 4 with them. And that's just a leadership factor that you're going to have to wrestle with and grasp and understand.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are times when there's a group of people, 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 families, depending on the size of the church. There's one that's really the instigator, and that person will set it up as, well, you have to choose me or the church. You have to choose me or this group. And of course, that group of people, because you're the pastor, you've been there 3 years. Well, they've been together for 30 or 40 or 50 years. Or
they vacation together. They holiday together. Yeah.
And then if you were to talk to the families that left because they were put in an impossible position, they're really not going to say much, right? Because they respect their friend and they don't want to get caught in the gossip circles. And and honestly, that's an honorable thing to do, is just to exit quietly and just, we've got put in an impossible position. So sometimes, there are groups of people that leave because there's an instigator. And they just that, or sometimes it's a family, like it's a whole, like it's a whole family, like it's, 3 generations and, several cousins. And it's like, well, grandma's mad, so we all kind of got to go, even though we don't want
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just like add this last part. And then, some people leave because we did something dumb. Okay. So we, as a leader, messed up and we got arrogant or we got angry and we said something or did something and they left and they were mad about that. So I'm not acting like leaders don't occasionally, pastors don't occasionally, they're not occasionally the root cause. I'm just saying that if you take an 8-year account of everybody that's leaving, it's not just the pastors. And especially if the elders are involved, I'm like, hey, elders, y'all are involved in these leadership decisions too. So some of this falls on you guys as well. But here's some groups. We're going to run through these groups. They don't understand the vision. There are times where people will leave a church just because they don't understand the vision. And in these cases, I'm going to say these aren't good or bad. It's just it's time to go in a different direction. They may want more of an emphasis on maybe justice ministries or something like that. Or they may want a church that is really built around what we would call like heavy discipleship, where it's really involved in like breaking down verse by verse by verse. And I've seen people go because some event like an Easter egg drop, that's just too fun. It's just too much money for them. They don't like that sort of situation, so they're out. They don't understand the way that that all plays together and the vision that is involved in all of that. So they're going to go and choose a church that more aligns with what their vision for the church is. And again, that's not necessarily the leadership's fault. That's just how sometimes it goes.
Yeah, I mean, the church that tries to move from being a neighborhood church to a regional church. Right. Or we're going to give up on trying to be a regional church and we're going to be a neighborhood church. That's a completely different paradigm, completely way of doing church. And there's going to be some who are just like, yeah, well, that's not really what I'm, want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes a pastor comes and there's a different theology. Like, there's, less Calvinism or more Calvinism. And they're like, yeah, I just, I'm not angry. You're a friend. This is not really where I feel like I need to be. So there's all sorts of, with the vision, it can be also theology as well. And there are, honestly, like you said before, there are good reasons to leave a church. If there's a moral failure and no repentance, get out of there. If there is abuse of any kind, get out of there. If there are NDAs flying around get out of there. We've talked about NDAs before. How I feel about them.
I think what I'm trying to hit here is vision is future oriented. And so you're going to go in a path that, let's just say Sam and I both attend the same church. Sam has a vision for the way the church should go, the direction it should be headed. I have a different one. Well, let's say in this imaginary world, I'm the pastor. In that case, all things equal, everybody being humble and Christ-like, in that case, the vision that I have is going to be the one we go with. And that's just reality. So I think I'm talking to these people who later on down the road, when somebody leaves and I don't like the direction that Josh was taking, at some point you do have to equate it to go, well, I mean, he was the pastor. So that's the direction we went in. And you don't go back and yell at Josh, or if we flipped it, Sam, and say, these people left because they didn't like the direction you were going. Well, okay, that happens. Not everybody's going to like the direction. And the reason I set it up that way is because the next one is less about future and more about the current or the immediate past. And these are changes that were made.
Things that have already been done.
It's done. And some of these things can be as minor as moving a flag off of the stage, maybe changing the name of the church, the service schedule, all these sort of things. These are just changes that they don't prefer. And there are going to be people that leave. And again, I think if the finance team at your church makes a decision and they change something, and then somebody leaves, that's okay. It's not something I'm going to lose a lot of sleep over, because as long as everybody handled it well and everybody was Christ-like about it, I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep over it, because the finance team in this illustration, they're the ones empowered to make that change. So if changes happen through normal means, you're going to lose people. And you shouldn't expect that everybody's going to stay. The funny thing to me about people who leave churches because things changed. Let's say that they had a church that had teal carpet and they changed it. They made it now.
Bradenton plum. That was
Okay.
the color. Bradenton plum. Very similar to the shirt you're wearing.
Yeah.
It was slightly more pink, and
Okay.
it was everywhere at West Bradenton.
So here's the irony of this. Somebody who's attending West B will get upset because they changed the carpet or whatever from Bradenton Plum. They go down the street and join a church that has green carpet. It doesn't have Bradenton Plum carpet either. You made the change again. And so I've never really understood people who will change a church because of some minor change and then go to another church that doesn't have that thing that they wanted in the first place. So there are just going to be people that leave because of change.
Yeah,
And it's okay.
you cancel or change a program. They go to another church because you cancel or change a program, and then the church they go to doesn't have that program.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you do that? But there are some times where, and we're kind of taking the posture here of people leaving and they really shouldn't leave. We could do a whole episode on like, hey, there's reasons for you to leave a church. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're just,
We
I
have
just want
talked
to,
about those. Yeah.
yeah, and we've done an episode on that. Why transfer growth is sometimes okay. So the posture here is more like, yeah, you probably shouldn't be leaving. But you know,
Well,
let me just give you a good reason why. We have an 8 o'clock service,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a handful of people that come to it because they got to work like at
Sure.
11 on Sunday. So they're like, man, I'm glad you have an 8 o'clock service. I'm actually able to go to church. Well, guess what? If we just cancel the 8 o'clock service, which if anyone's listening, there are no plans to do that. It's our least attended service, but there's no plans to cancel the 8 o'clock service. We love
Sure.
it and we're going to keep it. But let's say we did. And they're like, well, I kind of need to go to a church that has a earlier service. I can't come to your 9:30 or your 11 o'clock service. I'm working. I was like, okay. It's not that they didn't like the change. It's just that the change doesn't accommodate something for them to be there anymore.
I think what I'm hitting on here is less they shouldn't have left, nor they should have left. More, no one needs to get upset about it. Like
Yeah,
what
that's
you're
fair.
saying there, where they left, that's not a reason to get upset at the leadership, and it's not a reason to get upset at the person who left necessarily. Maybe, maybe not. I'm just saying these groups of people will leave because it's just part of the way life works. So if there's a difference in vision, if there's a difference in changes, the other one is just unmet expectations. There's going to be
This one's
people-
big. This
yeah,
one's
it
big.
happens all the time. And they have certain expectations for the way things should go or be, or the way usually the pastor or the leadership should function, and you're just not meeting that expectation. So they're going to go. Does that mean that the pastor is at blame? Not necessarily. That's kind of my point. That's just the way that God gifted that pastor.
You don't preach like David Jeremiah.
I don't. I do not preach like that,
I
man.
don't either.
Yeah. Right in our community, obviously in Dallas, Dr. Tony Evans is probably one of the premier
him.
preachers in Dallas. He's the premier preacher of our generation, one of
Oh
them.
man, that guy's great.
So if somebody was to come and say, I heard you preach one time and I thought it was a lot like Tony Evans. Oh, well, thank you. That's very flattering. But stick around, I'm going to disappoint you because that's not going to happen real regularly. And so if that was their expectation for me, I'm not going to meet it. They're probably going to leave. It would be crazy for somebody to come along later and be upset that they left because I don't preach like Tony. There's nothing I can do about it. And whether or not they have the right expectation, that's not for me to decide. I'm not going to get into that sort of stuff.
We had some people leave West Bradenton because I didn't make changes fast enough.
Okay.
And we had some people leave West Bradenton because I made changes too fast.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Is anybody wrong? No. Am I
No.
mad at them? No. They actually, a handful of people that left, I still have a really good relationship with them. They just had some expectations and they were upfront about it with me. They even told me. I mean, they were point blank and just said, here, listen, we need to move over here. Here's what's going on. And I just think that you should have moved more quickly. It's like, okay, well, you know what? I couldn't.
Yeah.
I really couldn't.
Yeah.
And it all worked out. It was a very friendly thing. I didn't like it, of course. I don't want anybody to leave my church, particularly if they think that I should be moving more quickly. I'm like, man, I feel like I'm moving fast. But anyway, but that's life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, your point in all of this is nobody needs to get mad over that.
Yeah.
It's just something that happened. I mean, you could sit there and say, well, it was slightly unreasonable of them to expect this. Well, okay, but they're not sinning. They're not in a bad place. They just had some unmet expectations. It is what it is.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes people will join churches or start attending a church and they're expecting things to change. This happens a lot in just, human romantic relationships. They have some sort of expectation for the other person. They're dating them for a little while and they realize they're not going to change in this area, or they're not going to be what I wanted them to be. And so they move on. And we all look at that and go, that's probably best. It's probably best that you guys don't stay together. I think sometimes in church, that's another factor, is there is a unreasonable assumption that no one will ever leave. There's also this unreasonable assumption that every church is a good fit for every single person. If they'll come and be holy like I am holy, then they're going to love this church. And the reality is that's just not how it works. Which brings up our fourth group, and this is one of the groups that we talked about in our episode about when transfer growth can be okay. And that's when you're in a new life stage. So there's going to be groups of people that leave a church just based on their life stage. And that's not anyone's fault.
Yeah, I mean, classic example is we were at the church because great children's programming, great student programming. All of our kids are in college now. We have an empty nest, and we're doing some things that we've never done. And it's just a good time for us to move over here because there's some other things going on that we want to be involved in. And hey, all the love in the world for you, but we really feel like God's telling us to start this particular ministry over here at this church, just
Right.
because we're in a life stage where we can do that.
Right.
It's like, okay,
Yeah.
there's nothing I can do about that. There's nothing they can do about that. They gave your church 20 years or whatever it was, and they're going to make this one move, and they're going to finish out their, spiritual life here on this earth at this other church. Like, that's not a bad thing. Maybe you can make an argument that you really should do everything you can to stay at one church your whole life, and fair enough. I would lean that way, certainly, but it's just not going to be the case for everyone. And it's certainly not a case, to your point, to get mad at someone over that, or to be upset, or to hold the pastor's, to hold the pastor to account for that. Like, pastor can't do anything about that. Nothing.
It's their choice. It's their life stage. And again, I think just by opening up the conversation and saying people are going to leave there are going to be groups of people that leave the church every year. Every single year. You're going to look up. Some of them might be your friends, and their reasons are going to be plethora. And if
do you know what the percentage is?
I don't. What is it?
So this is a national percentage. So we're talking transfer growth. This is, demographic growth is when somebody moves to your community and chooses your church. Transfer growth is when somebody is in your community already and moves from one church to another church.
Okay.
In the same community. So you want to take a guess as to the amount of the percentage of people every year that will leave your church or potentially come to your church from another church who just transferred in the same town without moving to a different location.
32.
No, it's actually 7%.
Oh gosh. Well, that's much better.
32%, actually, but 32% if you add up all the people that will potentially leave your church, death, transfer, moving, there's several things there. Attendance frequency gets less. It's about 30%, 32%. But 7% every year to transfer growth. So that means in a church of 100, on average, there's going to be 7 people that leave your church to go to another church. That's just a normal thing. So, this whole people are leaving. That's every church everywhere all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you do the math, in 5 years, 35 people, if the church runs 100 when you got there, 35 people are probably going to go somewhere else. Now, when you think about that, For a church of 100, that is a lot of people. And they probably have relational tentacles all throughout that church, so people will feel it. I acknowledge all of that. And there's no pastor or leader that wants that to happen. It's just the reality of it. Now, if in that same 5 years you pick up an additional 60 people, well, now you're running 130, but 30 of them left, roughly estimating some numbers here, then 30 of them left. So it's like from the leadership point of view, well, yeah, one of them I really made upset. I remember that one, and it was because I was angry that day. I've called them and apologized, but they're still mad. A couple of them left because of life stage. One of them just left because we used the wrong color in the nursery and they weren't upset. That kind of stuff, it just happens. And within the leadership mind, they're not taking that. But I've seen it just so often. I guess what my heartbeat is, for those of you who are leading churches, maybe you've had a deacon pull you aside and, list out the families and say, these are the folks that are leaving. And the implication, and I'll go ahead and say the evil implication behind that is that somehow you're to blame, and it's just not reality. So I want you to be encouraged by this in some way, and maybe even equipped on how to answer, because when you get that sort of accusation in the middle of the deacons meeting, or somebody takes you out to lunch and they just start dumping a list of names on your plate, you're rocked back on your heels and you don't really know how to answer to it. And so,
Man, you just brought up an old memory.
yeah.
Man, it was at my previous church. The deacon chair actually took me to a restaurant and just started yelling at me. And our server was a guest. I knew, she was a college student thinking about joining the church, and she came back to me later and was like, "Who was it?" I was like, "The chair of the deacon." She's like, "I can't join your church."
No.
And she felt badly for me, but I was just like the whole restaurant was kind of looking at him. So don't be that guy. Don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy. But if you are in Sam's position in that story, maybe now you can go, look, I know that you feel those losses. And I think what happened to you, Sam, was unreasonable. But in a typical situation, you can respond back to the person and go, I know you feel those losses, but the reality is people leave. 7% on average leave a church. Here's a couple of reasons why people leave. And I can't speak specifically to their reasoning, but I can speak generally. I can't and you can even tell them, I can't tell you specifically why they left, because some of that's privileged. Some of that is things I'm not allowed to tell you. But here's some general reasons: vision, changes, expectations, or life stage. And so, I'm sorry that they left, but that happens. So that's the show. Hope you're more encouraged. You going to close us out, or did you have something?
Well, I can.
Yeah.
Usually I let you do the intro and the outro because you're so good at it. But hey, Thank you, church teams. est.church is where you can get that offer. And if you're watching on YouTube, our YouTube audience keeps growing. It's awesome. More and more subscribers to Church Answers. Thank you. Give us a thumbs up, rate and review, and subscribe if you are listening on your podcasting app. And hey, we got some good episodes coming up these next few weeks. So stay tuned. You definitely want to stay tuned, and we will see you then.
Peace.